Hi. We are going to also see a video that we were able to pull together and produce to tell you about black suffrage. One of the issues that we did have, though, as always with minorities, is that trying to find the information is very difficult, but we did find enough to produce a video that I think you will enjoy. Resources are also limited because in order to get and gain more information about the black community, you have to really dig harder, go further, and things like that, because it's just not available. A lot of information has been destroyed, basically, also. So that is a problem. But we can always find it, but it just takes more resources to do so. So, one of the things that I wanted to cover was that the black suffrage movement was present and it was active, but often it was sort of behind the door, and that was due to discrimination and racism. So it's amazing how black women still went forward even though they had to deal with racism on so many levels in life, but they still went forward and were so very successful. Sometimes another thing that was often done is that our history has been presented as rather negative. So the negative part of our history might be put in the forefront, such things like welfare, being on welfare, as if that was what we were all about. And note that a great part of that history on welfare and blacks is actually a myth and a stereotype. So I wanted to really clarify that. Black folks all over the United States have, especially women, participated in being domestics. Domestics were women who basically helped run this country by taking care of families, homes, and churches. And black women put up with a lot. They put up with having to hear themselves and their families being called names like darky, mammy, spooks, colored people, Negro, and negress. And negress was specifically for black women. So, one of the goals of the black suffrage movement was to bring about a positive identity to the word Negro. That did happen. The women were very successful in doing that. It was done by announcing the accomplishments of the black women mostly through the churches. The churches were a very positive influence on black women and black families. Very valuable. So the black churches were able to push forward all the positive things about black American history. However, that did take generations and generations to accomplish that. But in the video, I will explain a little bit more about that. And then if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer those questions. I did want to say thank you now to a lot of people who helped me be able to present this. It was starting with the Ebenezer Baptist Church of Poughkeepsie, New York. Reverend Bell is the pastor there. Also, Ray Watkins, who is somewhat of the informal Poughkeepsie black oral historian. And then there was Kara Thompson. She's a local historian at the library, the Poughkeepsie Public Library. Then there is Daryl McGill and the McGill family, a black Poughkeepsie family who actually, they maintain, which is very admirable, their own history of their family. Some of his aunt's information I was having difficulty finding, but I knew that the story existed, and I was able to get a lot of information directly from the family. Unfortunately, sometimes the more powerful the woman might have been, even if she was local, she may have been censored in some ways. I want to thank Niall Clark of Niall Video, Penny Lewis, our local Poughkeepsiean, and Roger E. Williams, Waring Elementary School of Poughkeepsie, that cultivated my love of history. They once had the largest library in Dutchess County in an elementary school, from what I recall. I like to thank the Quakers. I also would like to thank Paola and her group. So we will now go forward and see the video. Thank you. What a privilege it is to join in with the celebration of women's right to vote. The women's suffrage movement successfully did get the 19th Amendment passed on August 18, 1920. At the time, the United States was growing in a developing country. There were battles over land that belonged to Native Americans, slavery, and what would be the role of women in the society. The definition of a woman was a white female. So who were the black women and what would be our role? All people of color were thought of as less than human, and slaves or descendants of slaves were designated as objects. Now, early on in the movement of the black suffrage movement, you also had the general women's suffrage movement. So I'm going to talk about the black women's part of the movement, and it was called the black women's suffrage. Black women began the black suffrage right after arriving on American soil as slaves. Priority at the time was to stay alive. Black women's suffrage moved on to issues of how to escape the horrors of slavery, then to making our voices heard, and to be defined as women, having our accomplishments being recognized, and later having our votes counted along with defining our needs. As part of the women's suffrage, we included the demand to be equal partners with the general women's suffrage. We did no longer want to stay or stand behind the door. We wanted to be equal partners. We didn't want to march in the parades at the end of the line, which sometimes was requested. Now, in Seneca Falls, New York, there was a women's convention. It ended up being the beginning of the formal women's suffrage movement. Because at that movement, in July of 1848, women made specific demands on what they wanted. This had never been done before. It was actually shocking that women were demanding what they wanted. Women were expected to do what they were told and be ladylike. So within the black suffrage movement, we didn't have that same type of expectation. The black suffrage movement encouraged and supported women speaking out against the injustices. And those injustices, of course, included slavery and the need to be who you were. Some of the heavy hitters in the black women's suffrage were people like Ida B. Wells, Mary Bethune, Mary Carey, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and of course, Sojourner Truth. Now, locally in the Poughkeepsie Dutchess County area, we also had some black suffrage women involved. They weren't always recognized as part of the black suffrage movement, but they were. We have a Mrs. Bessie Payne, that in 1958, she was appointed to be the principal of a school called the Little Red Schoolhouse. She also was involved in the Dutchess County Red Cross. She was involved in creating education paths for thousands of children with various handicaps. In 1913, her and her mother created the Poughkeepsie Neighborhood Club for young black women to get support in accomplishing their goals in life. We also had a Mrs. Cecilia Bostick McGill. She was a woman in the local area. She lived across the street from Waring School in Poughkeepsie, near what they called Mickey's Meat Market. She demanded equal pay for black folks working at a company called Schwartz Federal Bearings around 1946. She insisted that black women and men be paid the same as whites. To call attention to that cause, she wrote a letter of complaint to the President of the United States. At the time, her complaint was acknowledged, and it helped improve things for blacks in Poughkeepsie, New York. There was also a Mrs. Unetta Patrice. She was a member of Amy Zion Church in Poughkeepsie. Almost since the beginning of the church start, which was around 1910, Miss Unetta had 11 children total, 8 sons, with 6 serving in the United States military around the same time. She also christened the United States Navy barge at Eureka Dock in Orange County, New York, during World War II. She organized a group of women to prepare pork meat so that the glycerin created from the pork could be used to make bullets for the war. She organized events, social plays, and things like that so that people could come to the church and also be included in some kind of family entertainment. We also have a Mrs. Jane Matilda Bolin. She was born in Poughkeepsie, New York. She became the first black woman law school graduate of Yale University in 1931. She was the first black female judge of the United States in 1939. She was the first black female to join the New York City Bar Association. Her burial plot is right here in the Poughkeepsie local cemetery. She made waves for lots of families and lots of people by being involved in the family courts. We also have a lot of other people. There's a Charlotte Ray, the first black lawyer of the United States. She became a teacher in Brooklyn because she could not make a living being a lawyer due to discrimination. She was involved in the women's suffrage. We have a Yana Morris, who's still living right now in Newark, New Jersey. She has the only black-owned drive-in theater in the United States. There were many other local people like Mrs. Penny Lewis. She ran her own business. She had a shop where people could come and socialize, specifically minority people who had very few options. She also became involved in politics and represented her ward in Poughkeepsie, New York for many years. She understood that politics made a difference in the lives of black people early on. She is part of our program today. She's 92 years old and still going strong. You also had a Mrs. Buck who started a small girls club that eventually turned into the Catherine Street Community Center. We also had a Mrs. Emerson who assisted many minority families in operating the Smith Street Community Center, which I went to as a child. They had lots of events, and they had Vassar College students helping to run the program, and coming over, studying us, and we found ourselves just as interested in them as they were in us. We got invited to the college, and it was a good partnership, and we learned a lot. We also had women like Mrs. Dorothy Stanley, who was a chemist in Poughkeepsie, and she also was the principal of the Waring School in Poughkeepsie, New York. So we had lots of contributions, and we need to be proud of those. All of these women embodied what the Black suffrage meant. They were leaders, scientists, politicians, whatever was needed, they were that. And that was their special skill. They could be what was needed so that they could drive this Black community into success, and which they did. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to come and talk about them. I also have a poem in honor of them, which I'm going to recite. This poem is called Black Women's Suffrage Power by Cassandra D. Williams-Clarke. Always moving forward as someone else's something. The caretaker, the doctor, the mom, the sister, the wife, the lawyer, and a birther of life. At the same time, watching lives destroyed. All the while struggling through every kind of strife, while trying to have a time and a place for your life. When all aspects of life seem so sour, how did you evolve and get to smell your flowers? How did you flourish into the creation of Black girl power? In your spirit? Yes, there was love. Even at what was the last hour, that's what I call real power. Also, we have Sojourner Truth, who represents everything about Black women's suffrage. This was done by Vinnie Bagwell, 2020. Thank you. Okay, I guess I'll take a few questions if there are any. If not, this would conclude.
I do have one question. So you just mentioned.
You got it.
They can hear you in the
You need to come up closer.
So I have a question. So you talked about a woman that was one of the first Black lawyers, well, actually the first Black lawyer in America. And I've read about W.E.B. Du Bois' book, The Soul of Black Folk, where he talked about a lot of the lost history of Black lawyers and Black accountants, things like that. Where does she fall in that account of Black lawyers in this country? Because I think it's impressive that she comes from Poughkeepsie. Like, where does she fall in that history of during that time period?
Now, the Black lawyer was not known as having come from Poughkeepsie. That's some of the lost history. But the judge, Jane Bolin, she was born in Poughkeepsie. She's a Poughkeepsiean. And she was the first Black woman judge in the United States of America, and a Poughkeepsiean.
I had a question, a simple question. I wanted to know, where does Sojourner Truth monument is at? That statue?
That's a monument of a Sojourner Truth, was done 2020. So it's brand new. It's located at the Walkway Park on the Highland side. Okay, thank you so much.